IVM.
Hello and welcome to Simblified, the answer to the question, what if Google's I'm feeling lucky button was a podcast? This is we have a very, very interesting episode for you today. But before we get there, as is norm, we have our profundity. And take it away, Tony.
Yeah, this is a very nice profundity I received on a WhatsApp group. It's a badly formatted image, of course. It has APJ Abdul Kalam as the masthead with flowers in the background. And the text below says, "Smile is the electricity and life is a battery. Whenever you smile, the battery gets charged and a beautiful day is activated. So keep smiling. Good morning."
Of course. This is beautiful. This is like a classic Indian forward. No, it's got all the elements. It's got the flowers, the photo and the flower.
Yeah.
It's got some kind of reaching science analogy, and it's got good morning.
Yeah. And APJ.
APJ. All science is
and that's what it's these actually that's what if you were to classify forward, these are actually a dying breed of forwards now. You don't get them very often anymore. Like family groups are now reforming.
Yeah. These inspirational forwards are a thing of the past.
No, I think it's just that now these profound ones are seemingly becoming like legit in the times of crisis. So we maybe there is meaning to it. Like badly craving for anything to hold on to right now.
I find it depressing that people who were, who are devoting their life to creating inspiring forwards are now too depressed to create those inspiring forwards. So,
I know. In a time when everyone needs it, really.
Yeah. It's like when you get a dog for comfort and suddenly the dog is depressed. Like you've broken him.
Oh my God. Excellent. So anyway, speaking of getting depressed, there is we also have another trope that we usually do, which is our introduction with a random personal fact linked to today's topic. And the fact that we are going to share about each of ourselves is the most memorable run-in or encounter we've had with the cops. Now, this is not like traffic cops, okay? These are real cops. So any encounters that you have had with real cops? So I'll go. Hi guys, I'm Srikeit. And the most memorable encounter I've had with cops, as most largely law-abiding citizens would have, was when I went to the cop station for my passport renewal. And there I was... the memorable part of the whole thing was how they had kind of done what's that supply chain? The supply chain, conveyor belt. What is the thing in assembly line way of collecting bribes. They had done a very assembly line way of collecting bribes where there was like people would line up, they would go in a certain room, they would all reach a certain place, their forms would all be taken, everything would be taken where the signatures were required, and then a constable would come around and like literally person by person you had to pass on a tray in which you have to jo aapko man mein aaye dal do. So, and I had gone through an agent, so he had very clearly instructed me ki don't put anything less than 500 in there. So apparently some people, and I think I noticed some people who put less than that amount actually got into were just basically questioned and harassed a little longer. So the moment I just to be safe, I put like about I think I put 1,000 or something in there. So mine was like expedited with a smile, like the inspector actually smiled at me also. So very assembly line way of collecting bribes. So that was the only time I properly visited a cop station, I think. So yeah, that's mine.
Yeah, mine was a little funnier because I was in Warangal doing engineering. And REC Warangal.
That's Tony, by the way.
Yeah, this is Tony, by the way.
Okay.
REC Warangal was a hotspot for Naxalites, right?
Oh my
in
God.
the past.
You were at REC Warangal, na?
Yeah, which became NIT Warangal when I was there.
My father studied at REC Warangal.
Are you serious? Wow.
Yeah.
Such a small world.
Wow, excellent. Go on.
Yeah, so in the first year, there is severe amounts of ragging and all, like there's a state quota. So everyone from the same state usually sticks together.
Right.
So one guy generally took a trimmer and, shaved his head off just because, you do these things in engineering. Except the seniors saw it and they're like, okay, now all of you have to do it because, if one person does something, everyone has to do it. They said it jokingly, but we were like, chalo, what is there? We'll do it. Except in Andhra, shaving your head is, you don't do it, randomly. So once we went out of campus in a share auto, some 4 or 5 of us, all with the same shaved head. And then the cop stopped us and he went into severe questioning mode. So we had to somehow convince him that we are actually legit students and we did this shaving of the head by choice and we were not, a threat to society in some way or the other. So
wow, that is incredible.
I haven't shaved my head ever since, not even during the lockdown.
No, but the thing about in Andhra, if I get shaving your head, even trimming your head really, doing a really close crop, a crew cut or something, raises suspicions. I once actually went and just randomly got a crew cut done. I came back home and I got full 3rd degree from my mother. So,
I didn't know that. I'll tell you, I had my encounter with the police. It was very sweet. So
that's Naren. Go on.
So Sheila and I were driving early days of our marriage, and she insisted on taking a U-turn at a junction, a main junction on SC Road, where I was really sure there was no U-turn allowed. And she was, see, there is no sign. I said, the absence of a sign doesn't mean anything. You just assume that there is a sign. But Sheila being Sheila, took the U-turn. And immediately we were stopped by a cop. Really burly specimen, only 6 feet tall and roughly that much wide, and really big frown on his face. He came marching towards me. Sort of made us pull over. And Sheila was already trembling. She was the first time encountering the fury of the law. So, as per standard practice, I had a 50 rupee note folded in my hand. And by the time he came and asked for the license, and I gave him the 50 rupee, and immediately his expression changed. So the frown disappeared, and a very avuncular expression entered his, hitherto furiously knotted face. And he addressed Sheila and said, "Baby, ऐसा नहीं चलाने का, ऐसा मत करो." I wasn't split. So was Sheila. It was such a...
In different situations, that 50/500 rupee note makes such a difference.
But on the other hand, I've had generally pretty good encounter, good experience with the police in general in Bombay. They've been efficient, not needlessly, they didn't harass me. I don't know how the situation is now, but back in the day, we've had once there was some problem, a couple of policemen came. They were pretty thorough. They questioned everyone, and they eventually found a suspect who turned out to have done the robbery as well. So, and they returned. They found a stolen goods and returned it to the owner and didn't take a penny of anything. Didn't take a penny as a
Amazing. No, but
back in the day, it was pretty okay. I don't know how it is now.
Yeah. I mean, it's not exactly my story, but I think one of the most hilarious stories I've heard of an encounter with the cops is a friend of mine. She was at, she saw one of those full the SWAT cars that stand around in Bombay, like the ones that look like military style vehicles and stuff. That was parked one place, and of course a cop was standing next to it. And this friend of mine, like, she was standing around, and she was just really curious because they have like those slightly tinted windows, right? So she was trying to peer inside and see how it is from inside. The cop like asked her, "What the hell are you doing?" Like, very strictly looked at her and asked her, and she was like very cheekily said, "I was just curious to see what it looks like from the inside." A guy just looked at her blank and said, "Prarthna karo, aapko kabhi andar dekhne ko na mile." So that is, I mean, that actually, like, you're right. I mean, I personally have never had, but the one thing I've heard is that Mumbai police actually, most of them actually have a pretty decent sense of humor and are pretty fair a lot of the time. So anyway, speaking of, and that leads us perfectly into our topic, which is actually a pretty relevant and hot topic right now. This phrase that is coming out largely from the US called defund the police, right? And this particular topic, so I mean, this is part of a larger, of course, conversation that's happening right now, starting with the brutal police killing of George Floyd in the US, the subsequent protests, the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, which has spread to different parts of the world as well, and everyone's talking about race and all that. So those are much larger topics and they are up for debate as such. But I just wanted to focus specifically on this part because a lot of people, I mean, when you hear the phrase defund the police, it sounds like a radical idea. It sounds like an idea that is like a reactionary, almost an idea to punish the cops, right, for what they have done and how they have done it. But let's explore that. Let's explore that phrase a little bit, its history and what are the causes. Because when I started doing the research, I found a lot of things which I had actually no idea about and sound really reasonable. So just a disclaimer before we start. Of course, this topic is largely relevant from a US standpoint because again there is that conversation is happening over there. I have a small point about India to discuss in here, but of course this is largely from that standpoint. But there's a very interesting movement, and it actually gets you to think of law enforcement in a different way. So from that standpoint, be very relevant. So let's look at what this entire phrase is a part of. So this is exactly not like a current, like it's just gained popularity right now, but it's a long-standing movement, which is, so there are multiple movements that have been going on in the US. Of course, there's the police reform movement, which is all about like how do we kind of get the cops to kind of be less hostile? How do we kind of get them to like work with the community better? And then there are people who are called police abolitionists who are saying we don't need cops, and they have their own merits and the arguments, and defund the police somehow sits in the middle of both of these movements. So the whole thing about defunding the police is comes from this. So let's look at the history of policing altogether. Right now, policing globally has always been a way for the ruling power to kind of have control over the existing populace under them. So in the US,
there is the nominal objective of catching thieves and robbers. That's the thing.
So and exactly. Yeah. So which is where, right? Like a lot of us, all of us since childhood, we've all been like, oh, what do cops do? They catch robbers and thieves and like put away, like catch murderers. And that's the nominal idea of what the cops are supposed to do, right? Correct. But actually, if you look at the US, there was, so the US has the North and the South, right? So in the North, the policing system was actually introduced as a reaction to widespread immigration. So when immigration grew in the US, the existing white population started feeling insecure against all of these immigrants. And
So you
therefore,
mean the second wave of immigration, not the original one. Where
not the original. Very, very pointedly correct. Yeah. Unfortunately, the Native Americans did not have the cops. So, but yeah, so the second wave of immigrants started feeling insecure of the third wave. And the first wave of immigrants started feeling secure of the second wave. And this is where the police started getting introduced in the south. In the south, in fact, it was even more blatant. The first police, the official police regiments that were introduced across were basically transformed from what were called slave patrols. Slave patrols were what they used to use to catch like runaway slaves, track down runaway slaves, punish the slaves according to whatever rules were there. And when slavery got abolished, those slave patrols got converted into police, right? And while, of course, the role of those slave patrols or these anti-immigration watchmen, so to speak, transformed into the cops, what the reformists and the abolitionists argue is that the approach and mentality has always remained the same. That they have to control and protect the the reigning class / race from the minorities who are to be controlled, right? And that is the approach that they usually take. So here, what they did was, so now that's how this the police, they say, has been born out of like a history of white supremacy and settler colonialism. So now the arguments they make against this was something that was incredible to learn. The arguments against defunding the police. So the first counter argument that most people say is that, dude, who the hell will catch the robbers? Who will catch the murderers? Right? And this is where it's at. Like the police has actually been so in fact the best example for this is in New York. So after there's a New York black guy called Philando Castile who was murdered by a cop. The New York police got a lot of backlash, and the police unions said that fine, what we are going to do is we are going to slow down policing, right? As a reaction, and say, hey, we're not going to do full on policing. We're not going to do so much patrolling. We will only respond to certain essential calls. But basically, the cops are going to pull their punches and not police as much. And they literally did this now when there's no police, you will want to call us. The outcome of that was actually that the civilian complaints of major crimes dropped by 3 to 6%. And the total crime that was reported went down by about 10 to 12% during that particular period.
Yeah.
So there were fewer.
That's, I mean, in some senses, that's not a real measure, right? For instance, in India, the state with the most number of crimes is Kerala. Yeah. And Haryana has the lowest number of crimes.
Lowest crime rate.
Nobody reports. So
this is actually pretty much like COVID testing, right?
Yeah.
If you don't test, then you will not have cases.
Correct,
so the people who have the highest cases somehow seem like the most irresponsible when they might be the most responsible.
Correct. Yeah. So I think in New York, there's this whole thing about CompStat, which was the start of a numerical approach to policing. So CompStat was essentially compare statistics, and they followed an idea wherein looking at clusters where there were large number of crimes, we'll try to stop it. Yeah. And they had something called the broken windows theory, wherein basically they will try to reduce the minor crimes so that there is a overall atmosphere of lawfulness. And basically I think this CompStat is referred to in a lot of, if you've seen The Wire or Brooklyn.
I'm glad you brought that up, because honestly, in my research, I actually missed that part out, and especially the broken windows policy, because that is actually the fundamental of what is the problem of over-policing in the US, right? Yeah. Because their approach, the fundamental ideology of it is similar to the whole drug ideology of saying that cannabis is a gateway drug. right?
Yeah.
That someone starts doing cannabis, and tomorrow they will do heroin, and the day after they will start doing every possible thing that they can inject in themselves. So let's treat the person who's doing cannabis with the harshest measure, so that we nip it at the bud. And that's how the crime thing also works, saying that, if we find someone doing a low level offense, let's give them a harsh penalty so that we nip the big crime in the bud.
Yeah.
But what that has led to, that broken windows policy has led to, is that in the US annually 10.5 million arrests are made, and less than 5% are for violent crimes. So of course, what that leads to is, and later on also, because of the flawed judicial system in the US as well, what that leads to is that there is a higher rate of incarceration, disproportionately for minorities.
Yeah.
And also, therefore, leading to the US having the most number of incarcerated people in the world. But fundamentally, what that does is that more people are getting arrested for smaller crimes, and the cops are like just doing more arrests because they also want to meet that number.
Correct.
Where they need to kind of have a certain number they need to meet.
Yeah, their incentive is tied to this whole CompStat or whatever number is measured.
Exactly.
And therefore, the upshot is that they have a very strong stop and frisk policy.
Yeah.
And you know how randomly people get selected in an airport for a check or whatever. So the racial profiling is a very big element, right? So
the equivalent of that was before Diwali on highways in Ahmedabad. We used to have traffic police doing boni rounds. So basically,
to meet their Diwali target, but
meet Diwali targets. And generally, even in India, there have been several times, especially traffic police have been asked to meet quotas, or traffic police, when they are asked to meet quotas, they are making unnecessary stops. They're giving frivolous reasons to fine people because they want to literally okay, parchi phadna hai. So I need to do this because I need to meet a quota for the day. In India, the added problem is also of corruption, where
speaking of the broken window theory, one other thing I remember is this theory was debunked by the Freakonomics guys. So the theory is that because they fixed broken windows, the crime rate went down. This was popularized in the 90s by Rudy Giuliani in New York.
Yeah.
And the Freakonomics guys, Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner, I think, they ran the numbers and they came to the conclusion that it was not the broken windows, it was because of Roe versus Wade, right? So Roe versus Wade was a landmark US decision which allowed abortions in 1973. So in 1973, mostly unwed single mothers who had unwanted pregnancies were not allowed to have abortions before started having abortion. So an entire generation of neglected children who would have been predisposed to crime were absent because they were never born.
Exactly.
And that happened to peak somewhere in the mid-90s. And roughly at the time when Rudy Giuliani was going around claiming his broken windows theory.
Yeah.
And there was absolutely, that wasn't the cause at all. It was just overstated. And this, the biggest, one of the big sort of patrons of that theory, one of the big expounders of that theory was Malcolm Gladwell, the broken windows theory. And these guys, when they Malcolm Gladwell went all batshit and started attacking them. But the Roe versus Wade theory is actually held to be more credible explanation than the broken windows theory.
No, that's a great point. Honestly, I remember having read this earlier, and I'm glad you brought this up because I would have loved to include it in this, because the Roe v. Wade argument even continues to hold to this day, because exactly almost like a teenage after Roe v. Wade, exactly teenage years, 13 years after Roe v. Wade was passed, was when the crime started decreasing, and it continues to decrease even to this day. And the ridiculous part is, many more mayors and elected officials like Rudy Giuliani have continued to actually police funds have just gone through the roof during this period.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is they're like trying to show as though it's they are doing it for satisfying the police unions and demonstrating this lack of crime, reducing crime as a causality of increasing funds in police.
Yeah.
So that's where, and actually that's
it is perverse. It's completely perverse. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it ties in with your point about that argument of defunding the police is that there is little correlation between over-policing and decreasing crime.
Exactly. And that's where, the whole thing about diverting budgets to the police leads us to like a point about how much. So, I mean, when you're talking about defunding the police, what is that? What are the funds that the police has? Why are we looking at defunding the police? Is because the most major American cities, the number one expense they have is on policing.
Yeah.
Right. In fact, how it is happening is that there are two parts to it. There is the police fund itself first, which is a budget, which is a part of the city's budget, which is allocated to policing. And to take an example of a major American city, which is the LAPD, which is Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Police Department, the LAPD's budget is 17.6% of the city's budget. All right, which is $1.86 billion out of a $10.5 billion budget. But that's not the only part of the budget. The other thing is city has another thing called general funds, where they keep a general pool of money for any of the other requirements by the city. And it gets 53.8% of the city's general funds as well. So what that ends up being is that they get, so the overall amount of money that they're getting is close to like $4 billion. This is just the LA Police Department. And
they're putting the laws in Los Angeles.
and that's what. So, and this is true across the whole, across all the major cities. And what is jarring, especially, is that when you look at the other departments. So, if you take Los Angeles specifically as well, 53.8% of while 53.8% of the public funds are diverted to general funds are diverted to the police, the fire department only gets 16.5%. Other services, which include all other services, which is like paramedics, including mental health services, social services, all of that just constitutes 11.1%. Cultural affairs is 10.9%, and public works is 7.7%. So all of these guys combined also don't add up to how much they pay the cops, right? And this is actually where the problem comes in, is that they are so. And the funny thing is here, there was a great quote by a Dallas cop, which happened much before any of this movements got popular as well, where he said that defunding the police is actually a move to kind of safeguard the police themselves. Because he made a great statement saying that every societal failure is ultimately resolved by a cop. So it's like if there is a problem with alcoholism in the city, it's ultimately dealt by a cop. If there is a drug problem, if there is a mental health crisis, where the society is failing in protecting these people or helping them, the police is ultimately required to resolve these problems, right? So that's where, at the end of the day, you're asking the cops to do way beyond what their training and their core competency is. So what the argument that they say is that, unfortunately, what's happening and why these conflicts like George Floyd and all are happening is because you're effectively using something like a blunt instrument, right?
Yeah.
You're using a policeman who is trained in firing a gun, who's trained in restraining people, who's trained in locking people up, who's trained in interrogating people, to go and solve an issue which is either a mental health issue or an issue that requires a certain level of compassion, a level of understanding, a level of medical help. Those situations are all being resolved by a cop. So, in fact, that's where the situation came. One of the recent incidents that happened was a black man named Rish. After George Floyd, this happened last week. black man named Rayshard Brooks was drunk and asleep in his car, which was stationary outside a Wendy's in the US. Now, he wasn't going anywhere. He was drunk and he was asleep in his car. So what happened was the Wendy's guys called the cops. And the cops came, they woke him up, they had a conversation with him. He was drunk, he was very drunk. He tried to run. They tried to fire a taser at him. He stole their taser and like randomly fired it off. The moment he fired off the taser, the cop switched his weapon, took out his gun and shot the guy. Now, that's what I was seeing Trevor Noah's explanation of it, and it was brilliant, where he said that this story is not clean. It's not like George Floyd, which was obviously just heinous and a murder straight up. There was no fault anywhere. But there is a guy who's asleep in his car. He may be drunk, but the car is not moving. Why does an armed cop need to go and resolve that situation?
Yeah.
He's a guy who's asleep in his car that is stationary. He's not causing harm to anyone. If he wakes up and decides to drive the car, yes, someone needs to stop him. But then in that case, shouldn't that person take someone who is either a specialist with dealing with these situations, a social worker, a person who's an alcohol, maybe someone who's from a rehab clinic, someone who's just a simple unarmed cop even, right, can go and there. Why does a gun need to be present in that situation? And that is one of the biggest arguments against the cops, where they're saying defund the police and redirect the money into the community, into social programs, into care workers. And there has actually been a lot of there actually have been initiatives positive which have been done for this, which is, one was in Oregon, where there is a particular movement, there's a particular organization called Cahoots, which is Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets, which is basically what they do is 20% of the 911 calls they respond to, and they are just unarmed medical social workers who are going and responding to those situations, depending on that particular thing. The Dallas Police Department is actually quite progressive in these ways, that the Dallas Police Department actually, for most 911 calls, the cop has to be accompanied by a social worker and a paramedic whenever he goes. So that's another really interesting initiative that they do.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
and also it flows through from the whole Roe versus Wade thing, right? That if you take out funds from the police and actually use it for like societal well-being, whether that's parks or libraries or social assistance or whatever else it is, you automatically get a society that is better behaved and less in crimes. You don't always need to go in with the negative force first to do that. So I think that's also part of the Defund the Police, to say, take away the money and use it for something that actually makes society better on the whole, right?
Yeah, overall, exactly. And that's where the whole movement comes from. So it's not exactly a penalty for the cops. It's not like saying that, oh, okay, these cops have been doing negative things, so let's just get rid of them. But it's just rethinking the whole concept of policing, right? Yeah. And that's where I mean, and this is where honestly now it's a discussion. I mean, honestly, this is what I did when I was looking this whole thing up. I wrote Defund the Police and I read all the content there. And then afterwards, I wrote Defund the Police India. And all I could find was NDTV articles on this particular movement, but nothing other than that in India. Which is where I think, and this is my understanding, and I am not an expert I have not done my research on this, so I'm just saying what my opinion is here. But I feel in India, the problem is not the police is overfunded. The police is severely underfunded, as are most of the other services. There's a problem of, I mean, at least, I won't say there's a problem of under-policing, but definitely policing where in areas where there is crime is absolutely woefully underfunded. And what that does is, when the cops do come, because they are underfunded, they are low paid, there's a problem of corruption, there's a problem of people interfering with the police, there's a problem of misunderstanding. So India has its own, Indian policing system is also in its own way completely screwed. But
I think that's a little bit more complicated, no? Because for one, like as opposed to the US and India, no one really owns a gun or anything. So you don't
That's true.
have to go in with, the thing saying your cops are going in unprotected.
Yeah.
And I think a large, like it also depends on the area where the police are. And how people friendly and what the local systems are reflects. For instance, the motto of the Warangal police is ever victorious, right? It's not like to serve and protect or anything. It's very clear that they're there to crush and defeat anyone, whether that's an Naxalite or anyone else. So I think there's a lot of complex nuance there in terms of the Indian part.
No, completely. I agree with you. But what I feel is that there are a lot of parallels. Like even when you just said this ever victorious thing, right? When you see the parallel with the US thing, the cops are all asked to be instilled with a warrior mentality, right? They are required to be, and even like language that even Trump uses to this day, where he said, the police needs to dominate the streets. And when that kind of attitude comes in automatically, you're there. You have been trained to use force. You have been trained to like dominate,
and that's the first option that comes to mind. That's the first.
And that's what you're looking at doing all the time. That's your job. You've been trained to do that, and if you're constantly asked to hold back from that, then why will you have a gun? You want to use it, right?
So and that's they're steeped in that psychology. So that all their training is to shoot first and ask questions later. Yeah, when I went to the US for a visit, I was told if you are pulled over, you don't step out of the car under any circumstances. So you wait and the cop approaches you. In India, you basically go out and you try to.
Yeah. No, that's actually something. Yeah. Something very, very, very interesting. That even I was seeing Trevor Noah do stand up, and I found like the way he was describing, he was trying to highlight the difference between American police and South African police. And I found it very relevant to India, the way he was describing South African police, where in America, you go there and unless you completely comply and do all of that, you're going to be like the cop. There is a good chance the cop will shoot you. But if you're pulled over in India or if you're like stopped in India, I mean, nobody has problems like yelling at the cops also. Like you can yell at the cops. You'll probably get into a bit of trouble. You'll be taken to the station. They'll take your car or take your bike and create problems for you. But nobody is in any danger of getting killed or shot.
First thing, you inquire of the cop whether he is aware of your parenting. At least in Delhi,
that's what, I mean, the conversation in India starts very differently.
That's supposed to intimate the post platform.
Yeah. So that's where it begins. But again, the whole point about how rather than investing in ways to solve problems or solve problems by like using force or incarceration or stuff like that, investing in preventing those problems like Roe v. Wade in the US, like basically, I mean, one of the big reasons why organized crime in India kind of died down a little bit was just more prosperity, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's taken different forms, but like the way it was in the early 90s, it died down as more prosperity. So there are more economic ways of solving the crime. It's not as simple, definitely, but it is an interesting thought to take in. Yeah, that's pretty much that. So this was super fun. I had great time researching this particular topic.
For me as well, because I haven't really read much about Defund the Police, and my first instinct was that it was a silly idea to disempower the constabulary. I was thinking, and then when you look into it, you realize that there are very good reasons why something of that sort has to be done, and I think you've done a good job of simplifying.
Yeah, no, but there is an entirely different race-related angle also, where fundamentally, police departments in the US have been racist, but that's a much more. There's a much bigger conversation. In fact, there's just one quote which was very interesting that said that
constantly in the US, you are following the narrative that when police are trying to commit to reform, they say, "Oh, we are going to rebuild trust with the communities," right? And the guy is a black guy, and he's like, "You to build trust, you have to have had trust at some point in time. Tell me one time when any of the minorities in the US have ever had trust in the police." So there requires, rather than reforming the cops, there is a way of fundamentally changing it, dismantling the whole system the way it is.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But as long as we got through this episode without mentioning the Kuala Lumpur Police Department where you currently are, which is KLPD, of course.
That was the crowning glory, Tony. That was all that was needed.
Sorry.
Oh God, KLPD. No, but this is where I was just thinking about, how is the Kuala Lumpur Police Department like linked to any of this before you bring the whole KLPD thing?
Yeah. But Naren, I'm surprised you didn't bring up Bertie Wooster pinching a policeman's helmet on boat race night.
So that was, that's what the policing, that's what police like, upper classes, you pinch their helmet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They give you a sentence of £5.
Wow. This also reminds.
Yeah, think of a black guy stealing a policeman's helmet or a cap or whatever, right? He probably gets shot. So it's different for different people.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Compared to that, in India, a couple of my friends in Ahmedabad used to actually do this for sport, because there's that. Police have that the lathi, the transparent ones, the new fiberglass ones that they have now. These guys had made a sport of stealing them. So they used to literally lure the cops without wearing helmet. One guy would lure the cop to kind of come closer. The other guy would drive from the back and steal his danda. So these guys had actually stolen 5 sticks from cops.
This reminds me of a funny story.
See how Gujarat has moved from Dandi March to Danda. I think we've done a good job explaining defunda.
Defunda. Exactly. Oh, that is the title of the episode then. Oh my God. But anyway. So great. So Naren, you want to close out?
Yeah. So stay safe, stay funded, and safe.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. We appreciate their support. It's been a fantastic week on the IVM network. I hope that you've been checking stuff out, but some of the highlights that you definitely should check out. Ashish Vidyarthi, host of Begin the Journey, was on Cyrus Says. They had a really fun conversation. I think you'll enjoy that. Uncle Please Sid did an episode around development, which was really, really fun. On Edges and Sledges, we had Adam Holyoke, former England captain. While those guys are killing it, one cricketer after the other. Definitely do check out Advertising is Dead. We talk about esports with some really guys who really know that space. Smile India, absolutely right. These guys are killing it as well. So is Pawan at Pragati. Don't forget the Original Things. Again, one of my favorite shows. You must check that out. And thanks for listening, and we hope to catch you again next week.
Namaskar, dear Bandhu. My name is Ashish Vidyarthi. These are truly challenging times, and in these times, we need hope. Do take time to listen to my podcast, Begin the Journey. Available on IVM Podcasts, website, app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, there is hope because there's one life and we are alive.